Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Rowe.
And I'm Nique yours.
And welcome to The Invisible Men, where we make the achievements of incredible men invisible no more. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
I'm Nique yours, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI.
Yeah, Nique, as always, great to see you and great to see our viewers. As everyone knows, we like to highlight Black excellence and show off some people that you may not know but are doing great things for their community. And all of this emanated from something Nique and I and a group of fellows started, 30 years ago when we were at Harvard Business School. We created this film called The Invisible Men. And there was a small group of guys that was part of that original team. And today we have one of those men, David Hackney. Hi, David. How are you doing?
How are you?
It's so good. So good to see you, man.
Thank you. It's been how many years? That was what, 1991, 92?
92. And you've had an amazing journey since then. Now, you were not at the business school, so you'll tell us about what your journey has been. But now you are a representative of the 11th Legislative District, South King County in Washington State, an elected official. So, the voters decided you were the man. And so tell us a little, before we get to present day, tell us a little bit about, David Hackney before you were the David Hackney, even before Harvard. Were there any experiences that you had years ago that were kind of a defining moment in helping you think about your pathway into the world?
Sure, there were a lot. So, in high school, I saw myself as more of a student athlete than a scholar. And but I wasn't recruited by the big schools, but I was recruited by a lot of the Ivy League schools. And I chose Cornell. And one of the defining moments for me was freshman year homecoming. There was a gentleman who was on the football team. He was extremely popular. He was a DJ. He was from New York City, which was a big deal in those days. And we learned that his job after graduation was that he was an assistant manager at a Burger King. And he had been one of the more popular kids. And when we said to him, what happened? He called a group of young Black freshmen together and said, this doesn't mean anything if you waste it. All I did was prove to people that I didn't deserve to be here. I partied too much. I had poor grades. Nobody wanted to hire me. I couldn't get into graduate school. Don't waste this opportunity. He could have hit me in the face with a frying pan. Because at the time I was wasting that opportunity. I was more interested in, what parties I was getting invited to and who wanted to go out with me. And school was secondary. Playing time was more important to me. Those kinds of things. And after I saw that, I realized that just going, even the privilege of going to Cornell University, if you don't work hard and do well, you just wasted that opportunity. And a second example, also freshman year, a friend of mine who I thought of as a pretty social guy, hard partier. And I just said, I thought you had to make a decision between having a social life or a grade point average. And I had chosen social life. And he mentioned to me that he was on the dean's list. And I said, that's impossible. There's no party I've been to that you haven't been to. He said, I work when it's time to work. And I play when it's time to play. I get more work done and have more fun than anyone else. And I followed that guy around for a while and copied his study habits. And I went from barely escaping probation. Cornell has a strong weeding out system. So if you get below a 2.0, you are on probation. If you get below a 1.5, you should take a semester off. If you get below a 1.0, you're in the squares club. That means when you square your grade point average, it gets smaller. You have to take a year off. And I was proud that I had not been suspended. That was my achievement. And my parents did not know much about the Ivy League. They had been to college, but not in the Ivy League. And I lied to them and said, Mom, Dad, this is the Ivy League. A 2.1 is really good. They grade different here. But when he also said that his parents worked so hard to put him through school that he would not embarrass them and shame them by giving bad grades. Again, frying pan moment. I knew at that point I had to change. And I went from barely, escaping probation to the dean's list every semester after that.
Are you still in touch with this person?
I am. He's a great guy. The other guy, I'm not. The first guy, I'm unfortunately not. The second guy, I am. And he doesn't recall. He just, but he did recall that's how he got through. He's also a lawyer. He went to University of Michigan and has been general counsel of some major corporations. He's done very, very well for himself.
What do you think would have happened if you had not met him or been influenced by him?
There were so many. I mean, it was tragic. Cornell accepts a lot and flunks out a lot. One of my best friends, when we had a minority student a party at the graduation, he said, half the class at 1987 is actually the class of 1988, and the other half completely flunked out. And it was not, and we all laughed, but it was not. We go through the list of the number of friends into the dozens that disappeared out of Cornell. They flunked out, failed out, and they either from shame or whatever, we lost touch with them. And some of them recovered. One of my friends, who's now the CFO of a national rental car company, he was one of those gentlemen that we thought he came back. He changed majors, So, what I think about it is also too is, you're never out until you give up. Sometimes failure helps you learn what you need to do to be successful next time. And the more resilient you are, I think you have the better chance of success. One thing is we don't have role models. I didn't have, my parents were wonderful, but they went to college, but they didn't finish, but they didn't know anything about the culture that I had dropped into. And so it was up to me to find mentors. Some mentors were African-American, some were not. That's another thing I learned. Mentors are about people that care about you and have something to teach you. And some of them are African-American, some are not. Some are men, some are not. It's about who you have a connection with. But it's not their responsibility, it's yours to find people to lead you where you need to be.
Well said, David. Now, I've got to, of course, comment that you two are at Cornell at the same time, at least a couple years, right?
I was going to say, because I was going to say, like, I was class of 85.
Yeah, I remember you. Yeah, you were another guy I looked up to. You were a big deal then.
Oh,
I remember you. I couldn't hit. When I saw that, I knew you weren't there. Yeah, I definitely remember you. You remember me?
Stop it.
No, do you remember him?
My head was that. Look, man, I went to Cornell and I said, everyone was rushing fraternities. I said, well, I'm a GDI. Do you remember what GDI stood for?
Goddamn independent.
Goddamn independent. I was like, and so I was like, how can we not take advantage? So I had a fun time, but I hit the books, man. And
you most certainly did.
And I was in the engineering school. A lot of my black male classmates.
Oh, a lot of people.
Right,
because
by the way, included Robert Smith, who's now a billionaire. But a lot of our other classmates did not make it. And it was a really tough time because I remember talking to guys like, come on, man, this, I get that we're trying to live one life, but we're here for a much bigger opportunity and what we can do for many people that come after us. And
you probably know the first guy that I'm talking about. I really forget I think it was Reggie somebody, but I remember I was at a black event at homecoming freshman year when he called a bunch of us together and told us the story. In fact, he was not from New York, he was from Chicago. And when he said he was an assistant manager at Burger King, because he had been a DJ, he had just been a super popular dude on campus. He said that all the parties, I think he was Greek, I can't remember, but I just remember him giving us that advice. And I remember all of us walking away going, holy moly.
I mean, it was real. I mean, we had friends, who didn't make it past freshman year, didn't make it, everything you just said. And like, where, we come back to school, where is so-and-so? And just like, they didn't make it, and it's
not like a war. It's just that I think that they weren't, we didn't lose them, but I think it was kind of embarrassed, right? We're all moving forward and they're not.
Yeah.
I'll never forget a gentleman from New York City who was a Sigma. He's from New York City, and his name came up on the sanitation list, to be a sanitation worker. And he was a junior. He said, that's all I was looking for. Because those jobs, and those are unionized jobs in New York City, and they pay really high, and you don't have to work a full day. And he was good. And I was like, that's a bold move.
Look, if that was his choice and that's what he wanted to do, to some degree, more power to him. I hope it didn't come because he felt that was his only choice.
And then just to move forward, so after Cornell, I really increased my grade point average, but I knew that it would be more helpful for me to go to law school to do some work experience. So I ended up working in a couple of manufacturing plants and labor relations, on the factory floor. And there was a guy who was not a great friend of mine at Cornell, but I'm from Cleveland originally, and he's from Cleveland. His name is Tony Paul. You remember Tony Paul? Tony Paul was class of '86. So okay. Tony Paul befriended me when I got to Cleveland, even though we weren't great friends, on campus. Became one of my best friends. And we're driving down to the flats with Tony Paul and a bunch of his friends. And he mentioned a young woman named, you remember Misha?
Oh my gosh.
And Misha had gotten into Harvard Law School, right? I hadn't even considered Harvard Law School. I'm driving down to the flats and Tony Paul goes, Misha got into Harvard Law School. I was driving. I hit the brakes. I said, I know Misha. She's a fine person and very smart. But if Misha can get into Harvard Law School, so can I. And that's what I set my goal on. I was like, that's doable. Because I thought of Harvard Law School as something so exalted, so high. I wasn't even considering it. But I said, and Misha, she was, again, she listened to this. This was not any disrespect. I just said to myself, okay, that's a doable thing. Wow. And I began to really think about and talk to people about what needed to be done. And really it was, your grade point average is your grade point average. So you distinguish yourself by the LSATs. And that is not a test of intelligence, it's a test of work.
Right.
So I got a system. I went to one of those preparation classes. I had a system that I was there Sunday evenings from, in the evening and Monday through Thursday, from the time I got off the work till it closed, doing practice exams. Friday night, I took off. And Saturday, we had a 4-hour class. And Saturday night, I took off. I got rid of my television. I got rid of all social events. I had 2.5 months in which I did nothing. And I got into the 90th percentile, which is kind of what you needed as a minimum to get into Harvard Law School in those days. But I set a goal and I got really focused on it. And I found that that's something I can do. I'm much better with a goal. In law school, a friend of mine challenged me because I've always been one to gain weight, as you can see now. But he challenged me to run a marathon. And I said, I'm not running a marathon, but you can't either. He said, I can and you can't. I put that on there. My first marathon was a disaster. I did pass out. It took me 5.5 hours. But I was so embarrassed, I decided I was going to train and do it right the next time. I ended up running 9 marathons, and my best time was 3 hours and 5 minutes, which was under 7 minutes a mile.
Outstanding.
And, now, of course, I did not continue, as you can see. It looks like I ate the guy that there, but I had a goal, and when I put my mind to it, I focused. I got the advice I needed, what a training regimen was like, what equipment was needed. I got a training partner. Her name is Dale Brick. She's still one of my best friends. We lived on opposite sides of Cambridge, and we made it to Charles River at this boathouse at 6:30 in the morning. And the idea was you were not to let the other person go. If you weren't going to make it, you had to call the other person and say you're not going to make it. Well, both of us were so stubborn that each of us refused to. If you don't make the call, you got to be there. That was the thing. So we didn't miss any training days. And then we learned how to run, and I got faster and faster and more competitive. I ran a marathon in Paris. I ran Boston. I ran Long Beach. And I ran Marine Corps multiple times in Washington, D.C. And speaking of, I know I'm doing a lot of talking here. Speaking of role models, first year of law school, One thing about Harvard Law School is that there's not really competitive grading. So it's not like Cornell. It's the opposite of Cornell. They say, look to your left, look to your right. Everybody's going to graduate in 3 years as long as you show up. But we did have semester or year-long finals that were 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours, and that was the only grade for the course. So there was still a lot of pressure. And civil procedure was a 1-year exam, and it was open book. And there was an African-American classmate of mine who was not very social and I could tell was really struggling. She'd made the poor choice of bringing too many books. The idea is you can't, you have to study even with an open book. She brought too many books and she had them piled up on her desk and they fell to the floor at some point. And she was sitting next to me and she started crying. So in the middle of this 4.5-hour exam, I put my pencil down, got down, helped her pick her books up, put it on the table. Nice gesture. Go back to my exam. When the exam is over, the proctor refused to accept my exam or her exam, accused me of cheating. Well, you can't cheat much, and so it was the last exam of the season. Everybody was flying out to jobs because, most of us get jobs at Harvard Law School at law firms across the country. There was a huge party, but I was depressed because, the worst thing that could happen is you get caught cheating. Then you can get kicked out. You can fail, and I was just mortified. And I hadn't cheated. And as I was walking across campus with my head down, I bumped into my criminal law professor, and who was someone who had taken a liking to me. And she said, "What's wrong?" And first of all, she was walking with her mother. She said, "Mom, this is one of my favorite students, David Hackney." And I said, "Professor, I told her the story." And she says, "It's over." She goes, "I'm in charge of the administrative review board for discipline. Your case was just dismissed. Go have fun." And she had been a mentor. She wrote my recommendations. She guided me through. She taught me things like, I remember even in mid-career, she was like, "Don't take jobs for money or prestige. You're going to get that if you want it. Take jobs where you can learn something. Make sure you are challenging yourself, because there's going to come a time in your life when you're going to want to do something, be responsible for something, and you're going to want those skills." So again, Professor Kathleen Sullivan, she's the dean of Stanford Law School. She is a white, gay professor who reached out to me, saw something in me. And so those are the role models in your life, and having enough sense to listen, and made a huge, huge difference in my career choices and a lot of other things that I've done. And again, invaluable, so.
Incredibly inspiring, David. Thank you. You think you know somebody, but you don't know somebody. And that was, I remember you from 1992. And the one thing I would say about David Hackney is that you were about business. You were about accomplishing things. And that's what you just walked us through, which was very inspiring. Well, before we get to our speed round, I want to ask, what led you to serve? What led you to become a congressperson?
Well, I'm not in Congress. I'm in the state legislature. Although I like what you're thinking. I like the direction you're going. I tell you what, politics, we grew up as children in the Nixon Watergate era, where politicians are kind of like policemen now, right? It was not something that I didn't look up to.
Interesting.
What I saw with I became a federal prosecutor, and I saw politicians as targets. People that were getting bribes and corruption. And then I lived in the DC area for about 15 years as a federal prosecutor and in other legal roles. And again, I was not inspired in DC. I happened to take a job with Amazon in Seattle as an attorney. And Amazon and I did not have the same value system. And I left after less than 2 years. And I started with the settlement money, or severance money, if you call it. I started volunteering. I had some time to really take a step back and decide what I wanted to do. I got really involved in this organization called Tabor 100, which is like a chamber of commerce for small minority-owned businesses, and the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, which is an organization. I started volunteering on initiatives they had, and both organizations eventually asked me to join their board. Then I began testifying in Olympia getting to know politicians. I got to know the governor and his staff, Governor Inslee. And I just made a decision in 2020, which I expected to be the largest Democratic voter turnout, probably maybe in our lifetime, that if I was ever going to run, I was going to run in 2020. And I had initially targeted a district in downtown Seattle, which would have been very difficult and very expensive, and a Black political consultant who refused to work with me on that in that district. A couple months later, called me up and said, there's some opportunities in South King County. South King County has had, because of the gentrification in Seattle, a lot of low income and people of color had to move from Seattle to South King County. So it's now a majority minority. It's an immigrant district. It has lower average median income. It has more students on free and reduced meals. It experienced 77% of all the gun violence in King County and South King County.
Wow.
And there was a rep who had been elected 18 years ago when it was all white, and he has been asleep at the wheel. And someone said he didn't do anything bad, but he does not have the gravitas of an incumbent because no one knows him. And I took on an 18-year Democratic incumbent, and I beat him badly. I beat him in every precinct in my district, and I beat him by 20,000 votes.
Wow. Wait, you ran, was this in a primary, or did you run as a Republican against him?
No, I was Democrat. Basically, it's a nonpartisan. So we ran, there were three of us in the primary, and then my reward for beating him in the primary was I got to face him again in the general.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I beat him in the primary and I beat him in the general. And I will tell you, not to brag, because it was probably more on what he didn't do than what I did do. Everyone told me, don't do it. It was hard I could not raise money in this district. I had to raise money. You guys lucky you didn't get called. I had to raise money.
No, I sent you something.
I'm sorry. You did, Nique. You're right. I did call you. I apologize.
I didn't get the memo. I
had to call college and law school and family and DC friends because everybody, not that they liked my opponent, but they're like, you can't be an 18-year Democratic. That's just not done. Incumbents win 98% of the time. He laughed at my candidacy. There's some black guy from Harvard who hasn't even lived here, who taken me on. He thought he was going to crush me. And so really what it is the opportunity. It is to serve. You can make a difference. It's easy to be, negative and pessimistic. Never ask how the law or sausage is made, but, it's about educating yourself on the issues, advocating for your issues, and then you have to close. You've got to close with federal legislators to get the vote. You got to close with your community so they'll support you. They were like, don't vote for taxes in this district. I'm going to vote for taxes. We had a capital gains tax that focused on the very wealthy, generally people making over $600,000 a year. And so it was for the $250,000 of profit and capital gains. It excluded homes, retirements, and small businesses. So these are people that are legitimately wealthy. And the taxes, the 7% is going to raise, hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to be focused on early child care and education, things that my district desperately needs those resources for. So rather than shy away from a tax vote, I stepped up. Not only did I vote for it, I publicly advocated for it. I made it clear that everyone knows that that's what David Hackney is all about, making change in his district. And we're going to have to find ways. You can't do it without revenue. I would love to wave a magic arm and say, but if you want to get things done, and I do, and we need to. There's a lot of issues. We did some of the most impactful police accountability bills in the country. We banned chokeholds and neck kneels. We banned the use of tear gas crowds. We banned the use of police dogs. They can use their nose, but they can't use their teeth. We put in pursuit policies. We initiated a new standard for use of force of police, that they must show that they've used every other de-escalation effort before they use violence. You know, we put in all of these. We put in a decertification process. So if you get fired in one police district, you cannot move to another district because we will take your law enforcement license from you. You know, we recognize we have lost the trust of the people most impacted by police violence. We also recognize you cannot police a community without their consent. They need to be there as witnesses and they need to be there as jurors. And we have to build back that trust.
Wow.
So.
Wonderful, David. Well, I'm thrilled you're in the position you're in, and I'm certainly going to be watching the 11th district very closely to see your impact. So as you may know, David, we have a segment of the show that we call the speed round, where we offer up a couple individuals or philosophies and ask you to pick one and tell us why. So we'll start with our standard, which is Malcolm or Martin?
Martin all day long. I think, violence may get more attention, but it's not going to solve the problem. You know, very few things get solved with violence. I think the community standing up for what's right, that's how you build allies. With violence, you just build more resistance.
Very good. Civil rights or economic development?
That's a tough one. Well, first of all, I think economic development is how raising the water lifts all boats. But then again, if you don't have civil rights, that basically means people don't have the same opportunity. So I guess I'm going to have to go with civil rights, because at the end of the day, whatever reform you do, you must make sure it's available to everyone. We're one of the few states in the country that does not have affirmative action with the state government. I am going to change that. I promise you that. Affirmative action is not about having unqualified people or less qualified people getting state contracts, getting admitted to state schools, and getting state employment. It's about making sure that state resources are equitably distributed to people in the community who are also doing it. So I am going to fight hard to have Washington State join the majority of the rest of the union with a affirmative action program in the state for contracting, education, and employment.
Very good. And the last question, free speech or free enterprise?
I don't know how those things are juxtaposed. Free speech is how we communicate and how we, in our political system, how we are able to stand up. I've done criminal justice reform work, in the former Yugoslavia and Kosovo. I've done it in Uzbekistan, a former satellite state, where you cannot speak up, and people don't recognize what a privilege we have to do so. I can never think free speech is something that it's your political rights, it's your constitutional right. Free enterprise, I think, is the best system for growing the economy. But if I had to choose between living in a place with a great economy and no political rights, or having political rights and not a great economy, I want my political and constitutional rights. I want to be able to stand up and say what I believe. I want to love who I love. I want to pray to whom I want to pray for. I want to associate who I want to associate with. That to me is primary.
Great answer. Thank you, David.
Powerful. Well, really, I think two more questions. I'm curious. First of all, just thank you for your service and your thoughtfulness, David. It's so good to see you. And it sounds like you've done some amazing things in South King County, particularly around policing. So I have to ask, just given the national context with the Black community and policing, just commentary, given what you've been able to accomplish locally, what can be learned from what you've done to move us forward as a country? And again, particularly as it relates to the Black community and policing.
Well, I'm going to say something controversial. I'm going to say it here. I get it. I get the anger. I get the fear that the Black community has with some of the policing. But anger and fear are not great. It's not fertile ground for good public policy. So we cannot demonize the police. Yes, there needs to be change, and we need to communicate that change to them. But it cannot be that we want to cancel the police. The police are definitely necessary. for someone who spent 11 years in law enforcement, there is definitely a need for the police. There's also an opportunity to reimagine what policing looks like in the United States. We do not need an armed response to every incident. When there's a cat up a tree, you call the police. You get people come with guns. People with mental health issues, people come with guns. People, domestic disputes, people come with guns. I do think there's an opportunity to have a non-lethal response. And then if the situation brings itself to it, then to have it. That's the way they do it in London, right? The local police officers are not armed. There's like SWAT teams that are armed. There are armed teams when they're necessary. But your everyday, because right now, because the police are armed, if you're going to have a dispute with the police, that suggests that maybe you should be armed. Secondly, I do think that we have a culture now that whenever you're contacted by the police and you are not presently committing a crime, you feel like your rights are violated and you fight back. That escalation leads to a lot of the violence. We have a rule of law system, which is even if you believe that you have been questioned by the police improperly, the idea is not to fight back, but to follow their orders and make a complaint afterwards. So a lot of people will see that as being obsequious, but you can see a lot of disputes where the police officer's like, can I talk to you for a moment? No, you can't talk to me. I haven't done anything wrong. I get it. I get the anger, but that's also, we could have a system where police have to wait until they're actually watching you commit a crime. But I will tell you, that would be really easy for criminals to get around. And a lot of us will feel much less safe. And frankly, the most of the crime is going to be in communities of color and low-income communities. Yep. So I don't believe that we're over-policed in those communities. I believe we're under-policed.
Yeah. Wow.
And but we need to find a better relationship. We will all benefit if we can, develop a better relationship with the police. They need to also recognize they have to change, but we have to recognize that they are a necessary part, of our society. We can reimagine how they do their job, but we can't eliminate them. I don't say defund, I say reallocate. There are amazing groups in King County, mentorship groups with gentlemen and women some of them who have been incarcerated, some of them who can reach out to youth and show them a different path. Just in the same way we went to that high school. If you remember that high school trip we took?
Oh my gosh. Oh.
And how with the hostile reaction, they didn't need to see a bunch of graduate students from Harvard. They needed to learn from people that had been through the system. That's who they would most listen to. Yep. And so that's where it was pretty uncomfortable, if you recall, right? Yeah. They were not at all, because they couldn't relate. They couldn't relate. There's a group out here called Choose 180 and Community Passageways. These are gentlemen who themselves have been incarcerated, who now take into the hundreds of youth and young adults returning from the system, employing them, and how successful they are, and reaching youth in Seattle and talking to them about a different alternative. That's how we reimagine. We can take money from the police force, not to defund them, but to give it to these mentorship groups. The police come and get involved after crime is committed. These groups get involved and stop crime from being committed. That's how you reimagine. That's how you think outside the box.
Yeah, I hear you. So then this leads very nicely into our final question, because at that high school, there was a lot of Daryls in the world, right? And you better than anyone else remember when we did the original Invisible Men, all of it was designed around 16-year-old Daryl, a Black kid who lives in forgotten USA, this imaginary urban city. And we did that 30 years ago because we didn't think Daryl had enough visibility into people like us, right? Who have gone through similar circumstances. So I'm curious, given everything you've now accomplished, what would the advice be to a contemporary Daryl who lives maybe in South King County, or in the Bronx or in Dorchester? What would you say to him to give Daryl that confidence that he can make his way?
Just that, is that there is a pathway for you. There's a pathway. Some people have a steeper hill. Some people have more rough road than others. But if you set your mind on what you want to be and what you want to do, you can accomplish it. It's about finding the resources and being resilient. people that do not give up. I did not at all predict this path. When I was sitting there, I had no idea where my career went, but I wouldn't change a job or I wouldn't change a day of it, because even in things where I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be, I took a step back, looked at the resources and things that are available to me, and found a new goal. Chasing a goal, you can do more than you ever thought you could. And you'll surprise yourself and surprise others. And as you're going on that route, and when you get there, remember to reach back and grab somebody else and bring them along with you.
Yep. Wow. We just got some serious learning just happened right there. David, man, thank you. It's so good to see you.
Ian, so good to see you. Tell me, what did you do after college, Ian?
Dude, that's a whole other podcast, my friend. Okay. I went to Teach for America. After HBS, I went to work at Teach for America. I did the crazy thing.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
That's not crazy. You gave back. That's the first thing you did.
No, I received much more in that experience. It set me on a whole different journey, but it's all good, man. That's why I run schools now, because I want to educate all the Darryls and let them know that their possibilities are great. All right. Well, David, thank you very much for appearing on this episode of The Invisible Men. And thank you to our viewers. If you ever want to see any other episodes of The Invisible Men, you can go to www.invisible.men. And my name is Ian Rowe.
David, just want to say I've always been impressed and proud of you. And the 11th district is lucky to have you, and I'm sure you'll keep the same energy, the same spirit, the same passion for your constituents. And I mean it. I'm going to keep a very close eye on that. And as you expand your reach into more districts and more responsibility, the state of Washington's lucky to have you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for your service, and let's definitely stay in touch. 30 years is too long.
Well said. Thank you, David.
All right,
guys.
Peace. Thank you for watching another episode of The Invisible Men. You can find other episodes at the AEI podcast channel on YouTube or the website invisible.men or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.